If I had a nickel for every time Pedro Pascal starred in a show where he plays a cold single guy who must escort a special kid, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Both The Last of Us and The Mandalorian star Pedro Pascal, as he must protect some kid that is special. It is strange that both of these shows are airing around a similar time, as The Last of Us won't be over by the time The Mandalorian Season 3 begins to air. Both of these shows have gotten amazing reviews. The Last of Us currently has a 9.2 on IMDb and a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. The Mandalorian has an 8.7 on IMDb and a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes. So what is it that makes these shows so popular? Why do people love these shows so much? Today, I hope to answer that question. Everyone loves Pedro Pascal. Since his roles as Oberyn Martell in Game of Thrones and as Javier Peña in Narcos, he has been a household name. Pedro Pascal is a 47-year-old Chilean-American actor, and he has been acting since he was 20 years old. I think it's fair to say that Pedro Pascal is one of the most popular men in the world right now. I mean, come on. Is he not all over your For You page? After Game of Thrones, he has been in many projects, including Narcos, Kingsman, Wonder Woman 1984, and of course, The Last of Us and The Mandalorian. It would be foolish to say that Pedro Pascal has not contributed to the success of both of these shows. Everyone loves him, and everyone loves these shows.
But daddy is a state of mind, you know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy.
Spoiler warning. We are going to be talking spoilers for the rest of the video. So if you have not seen Season 1 of The Last of Us and Seasons 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian, turn away now. You have been warned. The show currently capturing the hearts of many is The Last of Us. It stars Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey and is based on the Last of Us video game developed by Naughty Dog that was released in 2013. For this video, I'll be talking mostly about the show because that is what is so popular right now. The show is set 20 years after a fungus spread all over the world, and this fungus turns people into zombies. The scary thing, and a reason I think the show is doing so well, is that the science behind these zombies actually kind of makes sense.
Welcome to Science Time with Jack!
Welcome to Science Time with Jack. I'm Jack, and today we're going to learn about cordyceps, the fungus that has taken over the world in The Last of Us. Cordyceps is a fungus with nearly 600 different species. You find cordyceps in Asian countries like China, Thailand, Nepal, Japan, Vietnam, Bhutan, and Korea. Most species of cordyceps are parasites that infect some sort of host. This host is usually an insect or arthropod. A lot of the time, we see them infecting ants. It is believed that an ant gets infected when the fungus releases spores that can penetrate the ant's exoskeleton. At first, the ant is normal and is unable to be detected by the rest of the colony, which is definitely strange, because usually ants are able to detect when a member of its colony is sick, and then the rest of the ants will kick it out. But cordyceps usually only affects a few ants at a time, because if a whole colony is infected at once, then the fungus would not be able to survive, as the fungus would completely eliminate the species that they count on to survive. The ant is then compelled by the cordyceps to move to a more humid microclimate, which helps the fungus continue to grow. The cordyceps then makes the ant bite into a leaf vein, and the ant will hang there until it dies. The ant is powerless to do anything about this. The fungus then grows through the ant's body until it explodes, releasing more spores. The scarier thing is that no fungus has ever been detected in the brains of the ants. The fungus interferes with the nervous system through bioactive compounds, which allows it to control the ant's muscles. Cordyceps has also been known to infect 10 different insect orders and spiders, but not all of them can control their muscle movements. The cordyceps known to infect ants are 100% fatal, just like in the show. And the ants can't do anything about it. Thanks for watching Science Time with Jack. Now let's get you back to the rest of the video. It's terrifying to think that these infected humans in the show are still there. They just can't control anything. The science adds some realism to the show, which I think makes it scarier and more enjoyable. But there might just be a cure to all of this. Ellie is immune.
You are not immune to buckshot.
And Joel agrees to take her to a Firefly base out west, where hopefully a cure can be made. Watching characters like Joel, Ellie, Frank, Bill, Tommy, and so many others make us feel something as we get to see real people with real emotions. These characters show that humans can persevere even in the worst of times. They experience terrible things, but still grow as people in a zombie apocalypse. There's something about these characters persevering through the worst of times that makes our problems seem more manageable to face. The Mandalorian has already had 2 seasons that have been met with high appraisal, and the 3rd season is currently airing now. The Mandalorian is set in the Star Wars universe and takes place roughly 5 years after the events of Return of the Jedi. The show follows a Mandalorian bounty hunter who is referred to as Mando, but his real name is Din Djarin. Mando is hired by the Empire to capture a bounty for them, but after realizing that this bounty is just a kid, he can't bring himself to let the Empire take him. This kid is, of course, Baby Yoda, but we later find out that his real name is Grogu. Grogu is special, and Mando quickly realizes this.
Hold them apart from... No, hold them apart.
Grogu can use the Force and has been trained in some Jedi arts. Mando decides that he needs to get Grogu back to his own kind, the Jedi, because if the Empire or someone else got their hands on him, it could be very dangerous for Grogu and the rest of the galaxy. The popularity of the show heavily relies on the popularity of Star Wars, but it's obviously more than that, as there are a multitude of Star Wars projects that have gotten less than favorable reviews.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Voy a la playa, ya subió la marea.
A critical part of the success of The Mandalorian comes from the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda / Grogu. But we'll get more into that later. Okay, so now that we got a quick recap of what these shows are about, let's talk about the 2 leading roles, both portrayed by Pedro Pascal. Joel and Mando have a lot of similarities, but they do have a few differences. The biggest of these differences is their upbringing. Mando was rescued by the Mandalorian group called Death Watch. Death Watch are kind of the bad guys of the Mandalorians, and have been described as a cult by many characters. Mando didn't have much of a traditional childhood or life, as he grew up in a cult. Joel, on the other hand, seems to have had a fairly normal life up until 2003. He had a job as a contractor, a house, a brother, and most importantly, a daughter. We really start to see the similarities in the characters once their worlds have forever changed. The characters of Joel and Mando have very similar personalities. Both of them are untrusting of others. It takes some time for Mando to trust others because of his upbringing as a Mandalorian in Death Watch. During the reign of the Empire committed mass genocide against the planet of Mandalore and its people. Because of this, Mando and his fellow Mandalorians were forced to go into hiding and to trust no one. While at the time of the show, the Empire doesn't pose much of a threat to the Mandalorians, Mando is still very untrusting of others. Joel's experience of living in a zombie apocalypse has turned him into a man who is very untrusting of others. The world turned into an every man for himself situation. In episode 4, Joel and Ellie get jumped in Kansas City, and Joel immediately knows it's a setup. He knows this because he himself is untrustworthy, or at least he used to be. Joel and Mando are both reserved. They like to keep to themselves. Mando was taught to do this while a member of Death Watch, and Joel is reserved because of the loss of his daughter. It is also because of this that both of them are very stuck in their ways. They've lived in a world where it seems like everyone is against them, that it seems impossible to change their ways of doing things. It seems impossible that for once someone is on their side. Mando and Joel are also both very skilled combatants, as Mando was trained by Death Watch, and Joel has always been resourceful and has become very skilled after surviving 20 years of a zombie apocalypse. Both characters also have tragic backstories. Joel had a good life, but when the apocalypse started, his daughter was shot and died in his arms. This would have an effect on Joel for the rest of his life. Mando was rescued by Death Watch, but he had to grow up in a cult instead of growing up with parents and a family. Family is very important, and Joel and Mando both lost theirs. The final major similarity is that the kids in these shows are almost like a new family to them. These kids are able to reveal the softer side of both of these characters. Ellie brings out a side of Joel that no one has probably seen in 20 years, and Grogu brought out a side of Mando no one had ever seen before, not even himself. I could go on forever about the similarities of these characters, but when it comes down to it, they are both broken men. Mando was raised in a cult. He was brainwashed into believing the Death Watch way was the right way, that this is the way. It's almost like he subscribes to these ideas. Mando believes he must stay hidden, stay out of the spotlight. While for a time this was true. For the past few years, there's not as much of a threat against him. Mando believes that he cannot take his helmet off in front of anyone, and if he does this, he is not a Mandalorian anymore. If you have watched any other Star Wars media, you know this to not be true, as Mandalorians frequently take off their helmets. Mando has been brainwashed into believing this. When Mando has to sneak into an Imperial base in Season 2, he has to take off his helmet to blend in. It's the first time people have seen his face since the Clone Wars. His fight or flight response is activated, but it should really be called the fight, flight, or freeze response. Because that is what happens. Mando is so overwhelmed, he feels so vulnerable. When he's asked who he is, Bill Burr's character has to talk for him. I think it's fair to say that this is the most uncomfortable Mando has ever been. He just doesn't know what to do. Joel suffers from PTSD. It's fairly simple. His daughter's death was obviously a very traumatic event for him. In episode 2, we see Joel freak out when a soldier reminds him of the soldier that killed his daughter, Sarah. He goes berserk and keeps relentlessly beating the soldier until he is pulled off by Tess. In episode 6, we see Joel have a panic attack. His heart starts racing and he has to stop and catch his breath. Ellie reminds him of his daughter, and he's afraid that he will fail her just like he failed Sarah. Why do people like seeing broken characters? Both of these characters suffer many hardships, have mental problems, and have tragic backstories. Well, it turns out that we don't actually like seeing these characters suffer. If you do, you might have some other problems you need to unpack. People like seeing triumph and people overcoming their obstacles. It inspires hope. It inspires us to overcome our own challenges, just like Joel and Mando do. Mando doesn't really know who he is, but he knows one thing. He has to save Grogu. He has to go and help the kid. He can't just sit by and watch the Empire get away with him. Grogu brought out a more human side in Mando, to the point that at the end of Season 2, he takes off his helmet so that Grogu can see his face right before Grogu goes off with Luke. Grogu also grew close to Mando. Spoilers for Book of Boba Fett. Mando misses the kid and goes to see him. Luke and Ahsoka think that Grogu needs to focus on his training and that it's not good for Grogu to see Mando. But Luke realizes that Grogu cares about him. And instead of making the same mistakes of past Jedi, he lets Grogu decide if he wants to train with him or go with Mando. Grogu chooses to go with Mando because the two of them have grown close and overcome many obstacles together. Joel gets Ellie to doctors so that a cure can be developed, but he learns that they are going to have to kill Ellie to be able to make the cure. Is it worth it to sacrifice one person to potentially save the world? Has he gone through this whole journey with Ellie for nothing? No, he hasn't. He's not going to let a daughter die again, because he cares about her. Joel is only human, and so is Ellie. They formed a father-daughter relationship that Joel thought he would never have again. But now he does, and he's not going to lose it this time. So, why are The Last of Us and The Mandalorian so popular? Is it because everyone loves Pedro Pascal? Yes. Is it because both of these shows are just well-written stories that have a lot to offer? Of course. Is it because of the adopted father and kid relationship? I certainly think so. Is it because people enjoy seeing a show where characters overcome their own problems to conquer their challenges? Most certainly. It's all of these things. People love seeing Pedro Pascal star in a well-written show. They love seeing a closed-off man opening up to a kid. Seeing Pedro Pascal help these kids out is what is shown on the surface. But it is really the kids, Grogu and Ellie, that help Mando and Joel out the most. Because it is these kids that really help Joel and Mando overcome their obstacles in life.
But daddy is a state of mind, you know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy.